If you're a physician in the career market, whether you're just recently graduating or looking for a career change, you're probably getting bombarded with calls and emails from recruiters. But do you really know who is on the other side of those emails and those phone calls? My name is Bo Boyd. I have been a physician, recruiter, healthcare consultant, and marketer for physicians and hospitals and practices for over a decade. I've placed hundreds of doctors in both permanent and locum tenens roles. Today, I want to pull back the curtain a little bit and try to demystify the process so you can better understand how the recruitment world works. I want to talk about the different kinds of recruitment, the different kinds of recruiters, and what things to keep in mind to help you best pursue what's best for you in your chosen career path. The first difference that I want to talk about are the difference between agency-based recruiters and in-house recruiters. In-house recruiters are those who work for a specific client, a hospital, practice, a multi-specialty group, academic medical center, physician group. They're an extension of HR. Sometimes physician recruiting will be its own department, but generally it falls under it falls under human resources. And these physician recruiters are often paid strictly by salary and carry a high level of requisitions. Requisitions are jobs. And the benefit here is that they know the culture very well. They work numerous roles for the same management structure, deal with the same contracts. They work in the same communities for the same either hospital, or maybe they have multiple hospitals with their system. Perhaps they have different clinics, but they know the area very well and it's very consistent. So the benefit there is that you have someone who can really speak from that personal perspective. They also do other roles than just recruiting. In fact, for them, recruiting tends to consist of posting requisitions. There's some very realistic ways, and I'm not trying to speak ill of anyone, but there's some very realistic ways in which they're not technically recruiters. They're marketers and sales. They post jobs, they get responses, and they will work off of those responses. In fact, and I'll speak here to my work in agency for a minute. I've worked in, like I said, locum tenens and permanent placement. I've worked for some of the largest companies out there. And I remember having a conversation with someone, and I don't want to say where it was, but we were talking about the different roles. And she asked me, well, how many requisitions do you carry as a retained recruiter? I worked with Mayor Hawkins at the time. And I said, well, I'll carry anywhere from, usually 15 clients, anywhere from 1 to 3 requisitions per client. And she said, oh, well, we carry over 100. And the difference is they don't really carry over 100 because these were 15 different states, different cities, different geographic communities, entirely different structures, different specialties. The contracts were different. Some were RVUs, some were collections, some were different length contracts. It was significantly different. And these are also places that had reached out to a retained firm to actually find doctors because posting wasn't enough. And so there's a significant difference there. And I'll speak to that here in a minute about how it works on the agency side. For any recruiter, consider them an advocate. Utilize that resource that you have. They can be helpful. They don't make decisions. They're not going to be the decision makers. They're kind of gatekeepers, but they can be influential. In fact, they are going to speak to their relationship with you for better or worse. So try to utilize that. You also find them often involved in onboarding and other aspects outside of recruiting. Now on the agency side. On the agency side is broken up into a few different groups. You have permanent placement and you have locum tenens. Let me speak to locum tenens first for a minute. Locum tenens, it's a Latin phrase. It means to stand in place of. And these are interim positions. These recruiters work at very high volume. They're paid either by hourly or by the day that the doctor works. So if they place a doctor for 40 hours a week for 3 months, 40 hours a week, they get a percentage of that work that's done by the doctor. So locum tenens recruiters can technically make a lot of money. Because they work at high volumes, they won't know the inner workings of the role very well. A lot of it is more that they can serve to try to negotiate a higher pay. You can, and I'll do some talks on more details of how it works because there's some things to know. I'll do in a future video of how best to engage with certain recruiters for the maximum benefit for what you're trying to accomplish. But just understand here on the basic level that a lot of times what they do, it's very high level. In fact, a lot of times they don't even have communication with the client. They'll sometimes work through a third-party vendor, VMS or something like that, where they electronically submit And so they are the least hands-on, and it varies. They work with very different clients. Some of them have deeper relationships than others. Because locum tenens is such a saturated career, you don't need to know much about medical specialties at all. Again, it's this very high volume. There's very little interaction on average that these individuals will have with clients. So don't expect a lot like you would on permanent placement or with an in-house recruiter. And then in the agency world, let me just explain this as well. The way that it works, whether with locum tenens or with permanent placement, is you have what's known as a split desk model or a full desk model. So I have been on the sales and marketing side, and I've been on the recruiting side. And usually someone is one or the other. It's very rare that someone does both. I've had the opportunity to do both for locum tenens. I worked for locumtenens.com. I worked for Merritt Hawkins. I worked for DRW Health. It's now owned by AMN. I worked for Aledade and ACO. So I've had the opportunity to do what a lot of others haven't, and it's been a great opportunity. But think about it like this, the sales and marketing side, these are the people that will be calling the hospitals and practices. Hi, this is Bo with XYZ company. Here's our services. If you're looking to bring on a doctor, retain us or sign a contingent contract, locum tenens, whatever it is, and we will work to recruit and to fill your needs. Then on the other side is the recruiter. The recruiter is the one that is constantly sourcing and working with doctors. In fact, if you're getting calls from people from agencies, it's the recruiters. It's not the sales and marketers. In a split desk model, which is what most companies are, you have one person doing each role. That allows them to really focus exclusively on what they're doing. So when I was in sales and marketing, I wasn't recruiting. I was just making calls. I was traveling. I was meeting clients. I was promoting our services, showing here's what we do. Here's our success rate. And then when we would get a contract signed, then we'd set them in a connection call, an introduction call with the recruiter, where the recruiter would take over and I'd kind of step back into an account management role. I actually had the rare, unique opportunity, which I'm so grateful for, to have brought in certain clients. And then when I moved into recruiting, I actually got to fill those roles. And that was really awesome, very unique experience. I loved recruiting more because I got to work with candidates. I loved working with doctors, advanced practitioners, clinical executives, and academic medical professionals. And you still get to work with the clients. So that's the split desk model. A full desk model is where one person is doing both roles. One person is doing the outreach, the marketing, the sales, as well as the recruiting. One of the benefits of that is you have one person that really knows from the inside out the client and the position. The problem is it's a lot of work, so they have much fewer requisitions. They're doing much less. It could be more difficult, especially if you are looking for multiple opportunities. One of the benefits of working with agency is that there's more than one opportunity. If you're usually working with an in-house recruiter, you got one opportunity or you got one client. On the agency side, whether it's locum tenens or permanent placement, you could potentially have multiple different avenues to pursue. You can just let them know, hey, I'm interested in this position, but let me know if you have anything else within this category. There's certain split desk models that have the sales and marketing, the recruiting, and then also something known as account management. Don't want to get too into the weeds here because it's not super relevant. Mainly you see it in locum tenens where one person will just do sales, then you never hear from the client, never hears from them again. The account manager steps in, manages the account, and the recruiter does the work. For all practical purposes, on the candidate side, you're going to be working with recruiters. That's what I really want to focus on here. But that's how that works. So that's the locum tenens side. On permanent placement, you have two main models. You have retained and contingency. The contingency model is a very high turn model. It's a very low touch point, high volume. The only time that the company is paid is if they make a placement. Now, understand, all recruiters are paid on placements. They have to actually put someone in the position for them to earn the money. On the contingency side, there's nothing up front. It is strictly placement. So what you're going to have is a lot of pressure from recruiters to move forward, very little vetting. Let me get you in front of the client. Can I get you submitted? The goal is they got to pay rent and then they're not going to do that unless you take a job. On the other hand, you have retained. Retained is when a client really wants to invest in a particular kind of search. So they will pay up front. They will pay a retainer. They will usually pay quite a few thousand in marketing, posting job boards, sometimes direct mail, posting in like the New England Journal of Medicine, Healthy Careers, Doc Cafe, MD Jobs, a lot of these searches, or a lot of these different places. And then they usually also pay monthly bills. And so they pay up front. Now, the recruiter usually won't see that. Recruiter will usually have a salary. With contingent, it depends. So they might be under draw. They might have a salary, but it'll be pretty low because their fill rate is going to be pretty low. If they don't make a placement, the company makes no money. On the retained side, the company still makes the money. The recruiter gets paid on the placement. So at the end of the day, every recruiter wants you to take the job because that's how they get paid. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. We all want to get paid. Doctors want to get paid. Advanced practitioners want to get paid. Recruiters want to get paid. We're doing this because we want to earn a living. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But keep that in mind with who you're dealing with, because you want to make sure that your priorities are put first, not someone else's paycheck. So understanding how that works. On the retained side, you are going to get a much deeper vetting process, or at least ideally. These are just kind of generalities. So just keep that in mind. This is ideally how it would work. When I was a retained recruiter, I would take a job. I'd fly out there. I would meet with the hospital staff or the practice. I would tour the academic center. I would tour the community. I'd meet with the realtor. I'd try to understand the housing market, religious, cultural, schools, recreation, everything that I could to be able to really speak to a candidate that might be a great fit, not just for the location. And I would speak with the administrators. I would speak with the front desk staff. I would try to get to know the culture. So that's what you can expect. Ideally, on the retained side, you're going to have a much deeper vetting process. They're going to want to get to know you, your personality, what you're looking for, what you do. I used to say things like, okay, open-ended conversation. Walk me through a week in the life. What are you doing? And tell me about your day. What's the clinic versus hospital requirements? If you're radiologist, how many reads, how many complex reads? If you're an outpatient or inpatient, what's your census, or how many patients per day are you seeing, and what kind of procedures are you doing? Whatever it is, I want to just kind of get an idea of that. So don't be afraid to share. There are certain HR rules across the board. There was a point at which we could ask, how much are you making? I don't think they can legally do that anymore. What I would want to try to find out is if someone's making, $400,000 and this job is $300,000, it's probably not going to be a good fit unless they're a really good candidate. And I can go to the client and say, hey, look, this is what they're making. Can we match it at least? Or can we try to do something better? Sometimes I would say, what do you need to see? And I'm working on another talk here about how I used to screen candidates to walk through and help you be prepared how to answer some of these questions. I just wanted to give a high level overview on the different kinds of recruiting and how it works, so you can kind of be prepared to go into these conversations. But that's really how it works. You expect more vetting and more depth because your retained recruiter is going to have a much better amount of influence with a client, because they'll sit down on a client call and they're going to walk through. I would write a cover letter. I would get a verified CV. I would put very detailed emails together. I'd have paragraphs of our conversation. Here's who they are. Here's what they're looking for. Here's what I think about this, and whatever it is. So that's how it works. I hope that was helpful in giving you kind of understanding how the recruiting world works. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I am just starting this YouTube channel. My goal with the placement rounds is to help physicians in this very and sometimes unnecessarily mystifying market. I want to take the knowledge that I have for the many years that I've worked in recruiting and help those who are on the candidate side, because the majority of physician recruiting in the world of recruiting is focused on the client side. And that's because clients tend to pay for it. But I believe in taking care of those who take care of us. That's my goal. If you like this, please subscribe. I would certainly appreciate it. Share, leave me any comments, any questions. If there's anything you'd like to see in the future, I'd love to hear about it. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.